Chapter 2. The Natural History of a Psychology Early Influences. It first occurred to me that psychology was to be a central theme in my life when the tides of war threw me up on the fertile shores of Sydney, New South Wales. I found myself with time on my hands, stuck in a transit camp, a naval shore base, named in a typical Navy fashion HMS Golden Hind. The turning point in my life was the discovery of a splendid bookshop in the centre of town with a large psychology section. To my great delight, there were several American textbooks on psychosomatic medicine, as well as the greats, and it was here that I first encountered Freud, who I read avidly because I thought psychology started and finished with him. This led me to my first adventures in psychotherapy, when I persuaded the medical staff at the camp to allow me to set up a psychotherapy clinic. This was absolute cheek, but at the time I felt that it was the only way to learn how to do it, a principle that has stood me in good stead all my life. My existence as a barefoot psychotherapist was short-lived. I was drafted to the Admiralty Islands in the Pacific. This gave me an opportunity to talk to the Americans who had been on the island for 18 months and were very homesick. I liked them very much and found them open-minded and easy to talk to. They welcomed the opportunity to talk to me about how miserable they were, and I, who was only too pleased to listen, had my first experience of having the time and the desire to hear people tell their stories and, to my retrospective horror, to presume to give advice in return. After some months the war ended, and eventually I found myself back in Sydney, but this time in the Naval Hospital where, wonder of wonders, I found myself running the neuropsychiatric unit, the psychiatrist in charge having departed to the UK on compassionate grounds. It sounds grand, but in fact the job was done by the excellent sister in charge, who told me what to do, as nurses have done down the ages. When I got home, pursuing my determination to become a psychiatrist, I got a job in a Scottish mental hospital of great repute. I slowly realised that I was not so much interested in mental diseases, but rather in the emotional problems of healthy people, and that therefore a mental hospital was not the place for me. I felt that I needed to be, as it were, on the coalface, and I knew where that was, in general practice. So in 1947 I became an assistant in an industrial practice in North Derbyshire, where I have been ever since. By the time I started in general practice in 1947, I had read some Jung, and when his collected works were published in English, all 14 volumes, I conscientiously read all of them, though I have to admit that the amount I understood was limited. While I was doing this, I found myself developing some ideas of my own, and it is difficult for me to know whether I am talking about Jung's expositions or my discoveries. By the late 1940s, I found myself becoming fascinated by squares and circles and boxes. I drew circles in boxes and boxes in circles. Jung maintained that circles and squares were the symbols of the self, the innate nature of man. I found myself dividing my squares into quarters, and at the same time wondering what the essential nature of that self might be. It seemed to me that since we originate from the coming together of the male sperm and the female ovum, it would make sense that the nature of man had female and male components. Certainly from an anatomical point of view, the male having female nipples and the female having the penile clitoris. Jung said that these were signs of our hermaphrodite nature. I then found myself drawing swords and bowls on the top of 2 quarters, and sometimes a tree in the quarter below the bowl, and a symbol for wind below the sword. These were obviously symbols for maleness. Jung had said that the man had a feminine soul, the anima, and the woman had a male soul, her animus, also suggesting our bisexual nature. He also said that when a woman was possessed by her animus, she became opinionated and argumentative, and that when a man was possessed by his anima, he became sullen and moody. He also said that the mind had 4 functions: sensation and thinking, and intuition and feeling. The first 2 and the last 2 being paired. I allotted the first pair to the masculine side and the second to the feminine. Some years later, when I caught up with the work that had been done on functions of the 2 cerebral hemispheres, I found with satisfaction that my speculations had some foundation in anatomical fact. I could say with some certainty that the left hemisphere was the location of thinking and logic, and the right the centre of emotion and intuition. I could then say, to my own satisfaction, that the left represented maleness and the right femaleness, the left being spermatic, active and penetrating, the right receptive, intuitive and emotional. I continued to work with and develop this model as I went along.